single richest country in the world, but today it is one of the world's poorest and most obese nations.
What if we told you that one of the smallest countries in the world was also one of the wealthiest? In fact, it holds a tragic and shocking past that will leave you in awe. Nauru was once home to the worst economic collapse ever witnessed on the planet. Yes, that's right, the worst economic collapse ever. Here's the story of how one of the world's richest and most prosperous nations managed to lose almost everything. From a staggering income inequality to a reckless financial system, this nation's problems were deeply rooted and complex. But can it find a way to rebuild and regain its former glory? In 1789, a British ship sailed by a small island with a central plateau covered in lush greenery, surrounded by palm trees and bordered by white sand beaches. It was love at first sight, and the island was dubbed Pleasant Island. Little did they know that this island would soon become the center of a massive treasure hunt. For decades, the island's only resources were believed to be coconuts and pigs. But then, a British geologist discovered something that would change everything: high-grade phosphate ore. Although it wasn't oil, it was incredibly valuable as it could be used as a fertilizer and animal feed. The discovery of dried bird droppings and algae might sound repulsive, but it was crucial for feeding a growing world population. At the start of the 20th century, 80% of Pleasant Island was rich in this valuable mineral. Germany, which had colonized Nauru, promptly bought the mining rights as processing plants, shipping ports, and supporting industries sprang up on the island, barely larger than Central Park. Around 80 million metric tons of this valuable substance were exported. But then the First World War happened and Germany had to surrender Nauru to Australia. By this time, the island had already become an offshore mining facility, with most phosphate being sold to farmers in Australia, New Zealand, and Great Britain at subsidized prices. However, decades of mining had already significantly altered the natural terrain of Nauru, leaving a trail of environmental destruction in its wake. What other secrets does Pleasant Island hold? Who will be the next to uncover them? Once dubbed a ghastly tract of land by National Geographic, the top part of Nauru Island was just the beginning of a series of horrors. Only 600 Naurusians remained alive at the end of World War II due to Japan's occupation of the island, forced work camps, and mass drownings. However, the horrors persisted. When Japan gave up, the Australians took back control of the island and aggressively tapped into its resources. Phosphate mining activities reached unprecedented levels between 1945 and 1968, leaving the island's economy dependent on this single resource. 1/3 of the island was lost to mining as a result of this exploitation, forcing the Nauruans to live in a moonless wasteland. However, the atrocities continued. The Naurusians were left with only one industry: digging odorous boulders out of the ground. The island's small size and remote location made it impossible for many businesses to survive. The economy was constrained by the production variables of land, labor, and capital, but Nauru's restrictions were particularly severe. The island had made a lot of money from mining phosphorus, but at this point, most of it had been taken by the countries that had the island as a colony. Because they lacked the resources and experience to establish any other enterprises, the number of phosphate experts was raised so that they could continue to milk the cow while she was still living. Actually, they had no other viable competitive options. The Naurusians properly demanded a piece of the action, even though it was clearly clear that the phosphate supply would run out within a lifespan or two. This marked the beginning of a period in Nauru's history when some referred to it as the Pacific's richest small island. Did you know that, in terms of wealth per person, Nauru previously surpassed the United States? In 1981, the average Nauruan had amassed a startling $27,000 in wealth, which is equivalent to $88,000 in modern currency. This amount was double what the median American citizen received at the time, when the GDP was barely $14,000. Even if GDP per capita is a very basic estimate of average richness, it is clear that Nauru's phosphate wealth and political freedom had enabled it to expand to a level where it could thrive on its own at the time of independence. They could, after all, rely on the government's provision of free healthcare and education, as well as the royalties that landowners receive from phosphate revenue. It was possible for many locals to choose not to work. At the same time, Nauru experienced all kinds of bizarre events. Despite the small size of the nation, sports cars were the accessory to have. The island's entire perimeter can be driven round slowly only in 1 hour, so it's hardly the best location for drag racing. Once on the island, a police chief made the decision to bring a Lamborghini, only to discover that he couldn't fit in the driver's seat. He was unable to operate his new gadget because of an impending health emergency on the island. Nauru had an obesity pandemic by 1980, according to an expert. Increased prosperity and unhealthy food choices were the underlying causes. The World Health Organization listed Nauru as having the lowest life expectancy of 170 countries in 2002 due to the country's high consumption of junk food and its high average body mass index. Healthy native meals like fish and coconuts were supplanted by imported ones, an additional effect of mining. Serious economic repercussions can also result from the workforce's bad health. Not being able to fit in your new Lamborghini suddenly seems like a relatively minor inconvenience in light of the broader effects of the obesity pandemic. From healthy eating initiatives to a lack of nutritious food, Nauru's medical status is a tale of contrasts and challenges. It's interesting to note that Naurusians are well educated and aware of the dangers of poor nutrition and obesity. There are several educational initiatives promoting healthy eating. The issue was rather a lack of availability of wholesome meals. The decades-long phosphate mining process severely damaged the ecosystem, virtually eliminating the agricultural sector. Spoiler alert! After the phosphate ran out, the economy collapsed, leaving most Naurusians able to only buy low-quality processed food. The Naurusian people only received a little portion of the income created by phosphate mining during the colonial era. Given this context, rather than avarice, they were motivated to continue mining after independence by economic need. A lifestyle where everything must be imported, including food and water, is not sustainable. Nobody bothered to waste time on manufacturing or agriculture since phosphate mining received all the focus. After all, the topsoil was removed for mining operations. Therefore, the area was already overused for cultivation. Given the otherwise constrained resources of the Naurusian economy, this is simply a textbook case of Dutch sickness taken to an extreme. In the 1970s, Nauru established a national airline. However, there was one more magnificent endeavor to ensure financial security. One of the most notorious tragedies in London theatre history was Nauru, A Portrait of Love. The musical adaptation of Leonardo was previously funded by Nauru. Da Vinci, the Mona Lisa, and a soldier were portrayed as participants in a made-up love triangle in the musical. Without a doubt, the musical suffered a catastrophic failure at a time when Nauru could not afford any form of loss of revenue. By 2001, they had run out of phosphate completely, and practically all of their foreign investments had failed. Inflation-adjusted GDP for the nation at this time was $32 million. Unemployment had reached 90%, and the educational system had mostly disintegrated. Just to be clear, just a few years ago, this was the world's richest nation. The economic hardship Nauru experienced at the turn of the century, however, means that this is simply the beginning of one of the worst chapters.